Welcome back to my series on chess opening theory. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the move 7 bishop d3 sideline in the mainline Winawer variation of the French defense. So the French defense is when we have e4, e6, d4, d5. And the Winawer is when white now plays knight to c3 and black plays bishop to b4. The main line continues with e5, c5, a3, bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3, knight to e7. And today we're going to be looking at the move 7, bishop to d3. Now this is not a great sideline for white. It looks like an okay move. But in reality, white is kind of doing things in the wrong order. It kind of has a similar problem as the rook b1 move, as this is kind of committing the bishop to this square a bit too early. So, simplest way to deal with this move is just to play fairly simple stuff, like knight to c6, like knight bc6, just putting some pressure on this pawn over here. White, of course, does not want to take this pawn because that would just result in, very bad pawn structure and white's center kind of collapsing. This pawn would lose its defender for one thing, so just very bad stuff for white. And now in this position, white will generally play knight to f3. Queen to g4 generally is not going to work anymore because black can now just play pawn to c4, and white does not have time to take this pawn because then black would just win material by hitting both the queen and the bishop at the same time. So instead, if white retreated the bishop to e2, black would now have time for knight to f5, and this is just a really nice square for the knight to be on. And normally, this move would not work against queen g4 because white would then have the move bishop to d3. But in this case, that move is off the table, and black is actually doing quite well here. Black has a pretty decent position. So as a result, this rarely ever happens. I was not really able to find any good games that feature this, and basically what happens much more frequently is instead of queen to g4, white will defend this pawn by playing knight to f3. And then we'll kind of have a, we'll kind of have a move 7 knight f3 line where whites kind of put their bishop on d3 too early. So black could then continue with queen to a5, hitting this guy over here. Here the pawn cannot move because it is pinned. And also applying some more pressure over here, so white has to do something about this, either by defending with the queen or with the bishop. So white will generally play bishop to d2, and black can now play pawn to c4, gaining tempo on this silly bishop on d3. And then after bishop to e2, black can play bishop to d7, and this is kind of just like a very decent, very decent knight f3 line where black hasn't even introduced any weaknesses on their queen side over here. Black has not yet committed their pawn to b6 or anything like that, and black is just doing very well. White hasn't even had time to try pushing the h pawn down the board. So overall, this is just a pretty pleasant position for black, and not too difficult to deal with. So before continuing, I thought that I should introduce the players. So with the white pieces, we have Van Nguyen, who is a Vietnamese Czech grandmaster. So he is from the Czech Republic, and he's still fairly young. I think he's about 21 years old right now. Yep, that is correct. And let's see. So he has won the Czech Youth Chess Championship in both the under-10 age group as well as the under-12 age group. In fact, with the under-12 age group, he won twice. And in 2016, he became an IM. So at the time this game was played, I think he was still a FIDE master because this particular game was in February area of 2016. And he became a Grandmaster in 2018, so 2 years later. And still a fairly young player, so still lots of exciting stuff for him in the future. Like, he's already been participating in some pretty big events, such as like the European Youth, the World Youth, and the Chess World Cup in 2021. And oh yeah, I forgot to mention, he won the European Youth Chess Championship in the over 18 age group. So very cool stuff. And with the black pieces, we have FIDE Master Andras Orosz, who is a FIDE Master from Hungary and also a coach on chess.com. I unfortunately could not find any more information besides that. And this particular game took place in the Chess in Kecskemét GM tournament in February of 2016. I think they actually generally had multiple tournaments in a year, but this particular venue was actually pretty sketchy. Like, I couldn't find that much information about the event, and there's probably good reason for that, because this particular venue actually is a little bit notorious. Like, it's kind of known as a venue where people go to kind of buy norms and stuff. There's even a prominent Canadian player who played in a number of these events. So I'm not going to make any accusations, but I will provide an article in the video description for your own reading, so you can kind of make up your mind about these events here in this venue. Anyway, more information about the players and the event can be found in the video description. And now back to the game. So the game continued with white trying the typical h4 stuff, trying to cramp black on the queen side. But black's like, no, I'm just going to immediately break free with pawn to f6, because you can't really get at me just yet. You can't really put something on h5. You can't do this yet because knight's in the way, and even if he did, there's like knight g6. So white continues with the h5 idea. Black immediately takes on e5. White goes for h6. Black takes. White now takes on e5 here. Black takes here. We have d takes e5. And black's like, you know what? Things are opening up over here. I should get my king to safety and also bring a rook to these open files, because rooks belong on open files. Rook takes h6. And the move that black played in the game was knight g6, which is okay, but I do kind of feel that knight to f5 would have been more challenging for white, would have been a better move. Like, basically kick this rook away and then just push the pawn. Like, even if it gets taken, you just push it. You just get aggressive and all that kind of stuff. But instead, black played knight to g6. White played rook to h5. You have rook df8. Rooks belong on open files. White's king probably does not want to go queenside with this queen getting ready to take this guy at any moment. So white plays king to f1, maybe freeing up the e1 square for either their queen or the bishop. So black plays rook to f7, defending the pawn this way. And oh yeah, one thing I forgot to mention about rook to h5. I should go back really quick. So here, the point of rook to h5 is to defend this pawn on e5. But again, white had a more challenging move for black to deal with in the form of bishop to g4, getting ready to take on e6 if black dares try to take on e5. Basically, this rook is doing a decent job just kind of stopping the h-pawn from going forward, like putting some pressure on him, and also, getting ready to do stuff like that. But anyway, this is not what happened in the game. We have rook h5, rook df8, king to f1, rook f7, defending this guy like this. Bishop f3, now bringing the other rook, getting ready to do nasty things on this file. Oh, white's like, oh, I do not like those nasty things. I'm gonna, try to get this rook away from there. And black decides to sacrifice the exchange for 2 pawns, And generally, these kinds of exchange sacrifices do work, especially in the middle game. Like, usually an exchange in 2 pawns is better than, having the rook, because rooks are usually pretty clumsy in the middle game. White, of course, kind of has to accept the exchange, otherwise, what was the point of playing bishop to h6? White would have lost a pawn for kind of no reason. Black takes back with the rook, keeping their knight active and ready to take this guy over here. White activates their rook on b1. Black takes on e5. And here, black has an overwhelming amount of pressure on white. Right? Like, black is getting ready to win yet another pawn over here. Like, maybe taking with the queen or something. And, this is pretty uncomfortable. According to the engine, the best continuation for whites is queen to e1. But after queen takes e1 check, rook takes e1, knight takes f3, pawn takes f3, rook takes f3. Black is doing very, very well in this endgame. Black's rook is getting ready to be very nasty. Black is very happy to trade these 2 pawns for each other. So white should play rook e3. And then black can retreat their rook to f7, but in my opinion, I think just trading the rooks and simplifying is actually a bit better. Like, bring the bishop over here to come here and defend this pawn. Like, again, black is actually pretty happy with these pawn trades. It's actually black who would be the one playing for the win here, even though white has the exchange. After rook h2, play pawn h5, because black wants to get their king into the game and not allow the rook to take with check. And basically, I much prefer black in this position. Like, it's about equal according to the engine, but white has to play very accurately in order to stay afloat. So as a result, white decided to try something different. White decided to give back, a bishop for 2 pawns, kind of change the imbalance to one of rook versus bishop and knight. So takes, and takes, and now white has some nasty threats. White is threatening both this knight and also to infiltrate in this way with the queen. So black stopped both of those by moving the knight and blocking the infiltration. And here, white played rook takes h7, which was not so great. Like, it does look fairly intuitive, winning a pawn and getting ready to, infiltrate further with nasty rook on the 7th rank. Maybe this rook can come to b7, all that kind of stuff. But black actually has a very, very strong reply here. Black has a very strong way of dealing with all of these threats. See if you can find it. If you want, you can pause the video and try to figure it out. I will reveal the answer in 3, 2, 1. So the move that black now played is a very strong rook takes f2 check. And white really does not want to take this rook, because if white does, then black will take this pawn and take back the rook over here. And white would not even have time to take the pawn on c4, because the rook on b1 would still be under fire. So as a result, white did not go into that. White instead played king to g1. Black played rook to d2. Now it's black whose rook is on the 7th rank, and black is defending their bishop this way with their rook. White plays queen to b5, again trying to get aggressive, attacking the pawn on b7. But this doesn't really work, because black can play queen to d4 check. And after king to h1, the issue with king to h2 is probably just that black can trade the queens, and generally black is quite happy to go into a bishop and knight versus rook endgame. So king to h1, like, the bishop and knight beat the rook the vast majority of times when it comes to those kinds of endgames. So we have a trade of rooks here. King to h2, black takes this pawn, defending their pawn in the process. Rook to h4, pawn to c3, queen to c5, and here black here the engine wants black to play b6, and we're going to see why in a moment. Black instead played queen to d2, trying to push this pawn up this way, but whites can play rook to c4, adding another attacker to the pawn. And now when black plays b6, white has the move queen to b4 because this knight is now pinned. So black goes for queen to h6 check, king to g1, queen to e3 check, king to h1. Engine doesn't like this. Engine wants king to h2. The reason why is because there are some possibilities after queen c1 check. But black played king to b7 here. The reason why queen c1 check is best for black is because after this, and then this, whites can, white can play queen c3, threaten the knights like this, but black can play king to b7, getting ready to, maybe activate their pieces and stuff, maybe get ready to move their queen in back and move the bishop out, that kind of thing. Put the bishop here, put the queen down here, put the bishop here to defend the pawn forever. A pawn on the 7th rank is just a very nasty thing to deal with. And with the queen over here, we defend the knight. So after queen takes here, black would have queen takes a3 and still be doing very well. Black would have lost this pawn, but gotten this pawn in the process. But that's not what happened in the game. Instead, king b7 right now, queen takes c3, and black decides to trade queens and simplify. We have queen takes c3. The engine doesn't like this, but I think it's actually okay for black to have done this. Just from a practical standpoint, it's very hard for whites to actually defend this endgame. We have b5, king to h2, a5, king to g3, bishop to e6, king to f4, king to b6, pawn to g4. The engine doesn't like this. The engine instead wants white to play more defensively, try to bring their king over to stop these pawns. Pawn to b4, a takes b4. The engine again doesn't like this. Normally, when you're behind, you do want to trade pawns, but in this case, black does have an additional resource, even if all the pawns are to vanish from the board, even if white is to sacrifice their rook for the remaining pawn. We have rook to c1, bishop to a2, rook to c2, pawn to b3, rook to b2, knight to a5, pawn to g5. White is trying to go for, trying to promote this pawn or try to get this pawn as close to promotion as possible, but unfortunately it's just not going to work. We have knight to c4, rook takes b3 check. The engine considers this inaccurate, but honestly it makes very little difference. The engine wants instead rook f2 here and then this, but this really just delays the inevitable. Rook takes b3 check, bishop takes b3, pawn to g6, knight to a5, king to e5, king to c7, king to f6, knight to c6. Note that this king is kind of stopped from going to either of these squares, and basically if black's knight ever reaches this square, this pawn will never promote because the knight can just come to g8 and sit there forever because the king can never take the knight. We have king to g7, knight to e7, and white decides to give up their pawn because of this problem of the knight just sitting on g8. So as a result, white just sacks the pawn. White's just like, yeah, whatever, I'll just, go into bishop and knight, go into king, bishop, and knight versus king. Now, this is a pretty rare endgame, pretty rare checkmate to have to know, but I would say when you get to the 2000 level, you should definitely know how to do this checkmate, because very often, like your opponents, they're a lot more resilient at this level. Very often, they will sacrifice their remaining material to put you in this situation. Like if you're in a minor piece endgame where you each have 2 minor pieces, maybe each have a bishop and knight, your opponent might sacrifice their remaining bishop and knights to get rid of your last 2 pawns and force you to have to know this. And so the very first step when you're in this situation is to kind of get your king and knight together, because they usually want to stay fairly close to each other for most of this checkmate. 8, and then the second step is to push the opponent's king to the edge of the board. So we have king to g7, knight to e5, king to f6, king to d6. So the king and knight have now come close together. King to g7. In my opinion, king to f5 might have been a bit more resilient by white, but anyway, we have king to g7, king to e7. Black now wants to try to force white's king to the edge of the board, and Black is doing a pretty good job of doing that because all of these squares are now covered. King to h7, king to f6. Now, so far, so good. King to h8, knight to g6 check. Very good technique so far. King to h7, and basically what you want to do is, like, the starting position. Well, before I get ahead of myself, in order to deliver this checkmate, you need to have the opponent's king go to one of the corners that is the same color as your bishop. The reason why is because if your opponent's king is in like one of the bad corners, the bishop, it can't really do a good job of covering these two squares at the same time. Like, it struggles with that. Like, it's not good at doing that. You need the bishop to instead cover like these squares or stuff of that nature. The knight, on the other hand, can do a good job of like hitting these squares and stuff. The knight is more flexible that way. And so basically, generally, the defending side, the opponents, they will, when their king is forced to the edge of the board, they'll usually head for one of the bad corners, like this one. So what you want to do is you want to get your king here, you want to get the bishop here, or somewhere where it's covering this square. And then you want your knight to be what gets the king out of the corner. Like, the knight can either come here, or it can come here if the bishop is instead, covering things like that. And basically, your knight is going to be moving in a W formation, like a W pathway. Like, this is kind of the standard way that's taught now, is the W. Like, you're basically going to push the king up this way, like this. And basically, like, in this position here, you're going to use some zugzwang just to force the king up here, and then, well, actually, knight f8 is a little weird. Okay, so that starts going a little bit wrong, but basically, the standard technique that's kind of taught these days is to play bishop to g8, and then after this, start doing the W, the knight controls this square, and if the opponent's king tries to escape, bring your king out like this, you keep doing the W. Note that the knight does a good job of stopping this stuff. And basically, if the king tries to escape, like if he tries going there or there, you use your bishop to stop him. You use your bishop to cut off the escape, and basically you're going to force the king back to the edge of the board and back towards this corner. This is kind of the standard way. Like, there's another variation, there's a more cooperative variation to know about, but the challenging one you should definitely know. No, but instead, in this position, Black, I guess, probably needed some time to remember the technique, or maybe Black knew a different way of doing it, because Black actually did manage to win this game, but Black kind of didn't use the W. Black had a different way of going about it. But Black played knight to f8, which does look a little bit strange. It allows the king to go up this way. We have knight d7. It's possible that maybe there was like a time control that was met that allowed Black to spend more time trying to remember things. We have bishop to g8 this way, so king goes like that. Knight's coming up like this, and so far things are looking okay. Like, the knight is kind of still in the W path. So far, things looked a little bit weird, but this is still mostly correct. Like, here, the move is just to go like this. Continue with the W path. Like, this is the W. But anyway, we have king to e4, which isn't quite right. King goes back, king goes back. Like, generally, like, this endgame, it's not too unforgiving. Like, if you do mess up, you do often have a chance to just kind of go back and kind of repeat moves. Like, you shouldn't rush. You should try to make sure that you spend a bit of time remembering things and calculating stuff. But basically, Black did have a method, although Black did kind of take a while to sort of remember it, which is understandable. Black might have been in time trouble and just, kind of needed some time just to remember kind of this very interesting technique with like the bishop going here to cover that and then wrapping around to come like this. Like this is actually some pretty cool stuff. The king dancing around. Like, I do know that there is a method of doing bishop and knight involving shrinking triangles, but I know the W. I like that. I like it. It's pretty simple. But this bishop wrapping around with the knight, this is some pretty cool stuff. So we see an alternative technique for pushing the king to the corner. Note that in this position, the knight and bishop do a good job of just stopping the king from coming this way. Okay, so king goes there, bishop comes here, and now we have reached the next phase of the checkmate, which is when the opponent's king is just stuck in these two squares. Like, we've kind of formed a little cage that he's trapped in. And so now what Black wants to do is just bring their knight all the way to here so it can give check, and then use the bishop to give the mate, like to give checkmate. Like, you can temporize with the bishop if necessary. Like, you can waste a move bringing the bishop back along this diagonal because it just needs to cover this square. But anyway, let's just see how the game ended. King goes there, knight comes here, king goes there, knight comes here. Black brings their knight around, and now we have checkmate. So that is king, bishop, and knight. Like, Black did go a little bit wrong, a couple of times. This was a little bit suboptimal due to the move repetitions. Like, overall, this took Black 45 moves, but bishop and knight is a very tricky checkmate. Like, even with proper technique, with optimal technique, if you're in the worst case scenario, I think it takes like 39 moves or 36, something like that. But it's mostly a matter of just knowing the technique, and if you remember the technique, then it's not too difficult. But you don't have to calculate too much stuff. Like, the most difficult part is actually just pushing the opponent's king to the edge of the board. Once he's at the edge, then it's just a matter of remembering things like the W or the shrinking triangles in this case. And so anyway, I hope that you enjoyed the game. If you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Alright, bye for now.